The message traveled across 17 relay stations before it reached Earth. It had crossed 4,000 light-years of empty space, bouncing from one communication hub to another, until it finally appeared on the screens of humanity's diplomatic headquarters in Geneva. Ambassador Daniel Price was drinking his morning coffee. When the alert came through, he was a tall man with gray hair at his temples and tired eyes that had seen too many years of alien politics. He set down his cup and read the message twice. Then he read it a third time because he could not believe what he was seeing. The Galactic Council was asking humanity for help. Daniel leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. For 11 years, humanity had been part of the Great Galactic Council. For 11 years, they had sat in the back rows of the assembly chamber. For 11 years, they had listened to the older races talk about them like they were children who had wandered into an adult conversation. The Velanthi were the worst. They were a reptilian species who had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. Their scales were deep green, and their eyes held the cold intelligence of a species that had seen civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. They called humans the infant species. They laughed at human technology. They mocked human customs. And now they were asking for help. Daniel picked up his secure communicator and contacted Admiral Catherine Cole at Earth Command. Her face appeared on the screen within seconds. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut short and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. She had commanded human fleets through 3 different conflicts, and she had never lost. "I assume you received the same message I did," she said. "The Keth swarm," Daniel replied. "I thought they were just a story the outer colonies told to scare children. They were real." "They are real." Catherine's jaw tightened. 14 colony worlds have already fallen. The Velanthi lost their entire 3rd fleet trying to stop them. The Venari homeworld is being evacuated as we speak. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Velanthi 3rd fleet was legendary. 2,000 warships crewed by soldiers who had trained for centuries. Gone. Just gone. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Bad. The Keth are not like anything the Council has faced before. They are a swarm intelligence. Billions of organic drones controlled by a single hive mind. They consume everything. Planets, ships, people. They use the biomass to create more drones, and then they move on to the next system, and the Council cannot stop them." Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. The Council has spent the last 10,000 years believing that intelligence leads to peace. They thought that any species advanced enough to travel between stars would naturally become peaceful. They stopped building weapons. They stopped training soldiers. They forgot what war really means. Daniel thought about all the times the Velanthi had criticized humanity for maintaining a military. All the speeches about how humans were too aggressive, too violent, too primitive to understand that the universe had moved beyond such barbaric concepts as war. "What do they want from us?" he asked. "They want us to send ships. They expect us to send maybe a few dozen. A token gesture to show that we stand with them." "And what are we actually going to send?" Catherine smiled, and for a moment she looked like a different person. Not the tired old admiral who spent her days pushing papers and attending meetings. She looked like a warrior. "Everything," she said. "We are going to send everything." Daniel blinked. "Admiral, with respect, the Council believes we have 300 combat-capable ships. If we send more than that, then they will finally learn the truth." Catherine leaned forward. "Daniel, we have been preparing for this moment for 200 years. Since the day we made first contact and realized that the galaxy was full of species who had forgotten how to fight, we knew that someday something would come that their philosophy could not defeat. Something hungry. Something endless. Something that did not care about diplomacy or reason. You knew the Keth would come. We knew something would come. The universe is too big and too old for there not to be predators. So we smiled and nodded when they laughed at us. We pretended to be weak. We let them believe we were the backward children they thought we were. And all the while, we built." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He had served as ambassador for 15 years, and he had never known. No one outside of military command had known. How many ships do we actually have? He finally asked and Catherine told him. Daniel nearly dropped his communicator. That is impossible, he whispered. Where did we hide them all? The asteroid belts, the gas giant moons, the deep space stations that we told everyone were mining operations or research facilities. We have been building in secret for generations, Daniel. Fathers passed the work to sons. Mothers passed it to daughters. An entire civilization dedicated to preparing for a war we hoped would never come. And now it has come. Yes, and we are ready. Daniel thought about what this would mean. The Council would be shocked. The Volanthi would be humiliated. Everything humanity had built over 11 years of careful diplomacy would be thrown away in an instant. But the alternative was extinction. Not just for humanity, but for every species in the galaxy. What do you need me to do? He asked. Contact the Council. Tell them we accept their request for aid. Tell them to clear all major transit corridors. Every single one, they will ask why. Let them ask. They will have their answer soon enough. Daniel nodded slowly. Admiral, when this is over, nothing will ever be the same. They will fear us. Catherine's expression softened just a little. Perhaps. Or perhaps they will finally understand us. We do not build weapons because we love war, Daniel. We build them because we love peace. Real peace. The kind that can only exist when good people have the strength to protect it. She paused and looked directly at him through the screen. Send the message. Tell them humanity is coming. And tell them to get out of our way. The transmission ended. Daniel sat alone in his office for several minutes, just breathing. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and began composing the most important diplomatic message in human history. Across the galaxy, the Keth swarm continued its advance. Billions of drones moving through the darkness like a living tide. They had consumed 100 civilizations across 100,000 years. They had never known defeat. They did not know that defeat was coming for them now. Wrapped in steel and fire and carried by a species that the galaxy had dismissed as primitive, humanity was going to war. Hi. Counselor Zevroth stood in the command center of the Volanthi flagship and watched his civilization die. The tactical displays showed the Keth swarm spreading across the star maps like a disease. Each red dot was a world that had fallen. Each blinking light was a fleet that had been destroyed. His people had ruled these stars for 12,000 years. They had built wonders that other species could not even imagine. They had created art and music and philosophy that would endure for eternity. But none of that mattered now. The Keth did not care about art. They did not appreciate music. They consumed and they grew and they moved on. Zevroth was old, even by Volanthi standards. His scales had faded from bright green to a dull gray-green that spoke of centuries. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had guided his people through plagues and political crises and the great Reformation that had brought peace to the galaxy. But he had never seen anything like this. "Play, Counselor," his aide said, approaching with a data tablet. She was young, her scales still bright, her eyes still holding hope. "The humans have agreed to send aid." Zevroth made a dismissive gesture with one clawed hand. "How many ships? 10, 20? They did not specify a number, High Counselor. But they have requested that we clear all major transit corridors. All of them." Zevroth turned to look at her. "That is a strange request. Why would they need so much space?" "I do not know, High Counselor. Perhaps they wish to move quickly." Zevroth almost laughed. The humans and their precious urgency. They had been part of galactic civilization for barely a generation, and they still acted like every moment was a crisis. The older races had learned patience over thousands of years, but humans rushed everywhere, always in a hurry, always worried about time. It was one of the many things that made them seem so primitive. "Grant their request," he said, waving his hand again. "Let them have their clear corridors. Whatever token force they send will be appreciated even if it makes no difference." "Yes, High Counselor." Zevroth returned his attention to the tactical displays. The main Keth swarm was now only 3 transit jumps away from Velrath Prime, the ancient homeworld of his people. Evacuation ships were leaving by the thousands, carrying civilians to what everyone hoped would be safety. But there was nowhere that was truly safe. Not anymore. An hour passed. Then two. Zevroth was about to retire to his quarters when the sensor officer suddenly stood up from her station. Her scales had gone pale, which was something that only happened to Velanthi when they experienced extreme emotion. "Hi, Counselor," she said. Her voice was shaking. "You need to see this." "What is it now?" "The Soul Transit Gate. The human gateway. Something is happening." Zevroth walked to her station and looked at the display she was pointing to. For a moment, he did not understand what he was. Seeing the numbers could not be correct. Sensors had to be malfunctioning. Ships were coming through the Soul Transit Gate. Human ships. But not 10 or 20 or even 100,000s. They poured through the gate in perfect formation. Wave after wave of vessels painted in the dark gray that humans favored for their military ships. Dreadnoughts that were nearly as large as small moons led the way. Behind them came carrier groups, each carrier surrounded by hundreds of smaller escort vessels. Destroyers moved in precise patterns, covering every angle of approach. "This is impossible," Zevroth whispered. More ships were coming through. The count on the display kept climbing. 5,000, 7,000, 10,000. And still they came, an endless river of steel and weapons pouring out of the human gateway. "Hi, Counselor," the sensor officer said, her voice barely audible. "Our intelligence indicated that humanity possessed approximately 300 combat-capable vessels. I am aware of our intelligence reports. Sir, the count has just passed 15,000, and they are still coming." Zevroth gripped the edge of her station so hard that his claws left marks in the metal. Around him, the entire command center had gone silent. Every Velanthi officer was staring at the displays with the same expression of disbelief. "Where did they hide all of this?" someone asked. No one had an answer. The count passed 20,000, then 30,000. The human fleet was now large enough to fill an entire star system. And still the Soul Transit Gate kept delivering more ships. Zevroth thought about all the times he had mocked humanity in the council chambers. All the speeches he had given about their primitive nature, all the jokes he had made about their obsession with weapons and military strength. They had let him say those things. They had smiled and nodded and never corrected him. They had pretended to be exactly what he accused them of being, a young species too foolish to understand that war was obsolete. And all the while, they had been building this. "Open a channel to the human fleet," Zevroth ordered. "Channel open, High Counselor." Zevroth took a breath. He was about to speak to the very species he had spent decades dismissing as inferior. He was about to ask them for help. Real help. The kind that only they could provide. "Human fleet, this is High Counselor Zevroth of the Velanthi. We did not expect such a response to our request." There was a pause before the reply came. A human woman appeared on the communication screen. She had silver hair and eyes that seemed to look right through him. "High Counselor, this is Admiral Catherine Cole of Earth Command. We received your message and we have come to help. Your fleet is impressive. We had no idea you possessed such strength." That was the intention, High Counselor. Zevroth felt his scales flush with embarrassment. They had hidden their power on purpose. It let the galaxy believe they were weak because it suited their plans. "Admiral, the Keth swarm is vast beyond anything we have faced." "Even with your fleet, High Counselor," Catherine interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "With respect, you have no idea what we are capable of. You have never seen humans fight. You have never seen what we can do when we stop pretending." On the tactical display, the count passed 50,000 ships. "Pull your remaining forces back," Catherine continued. "Focus on evacuation and civilian protection. The Keth swarm is now our responsibility. But surely you will need support. Surely we can assist in some way." Catherine smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey. "High Counselor, your ships would only get in the way. This is what humanity was built for. This is what we do." The communication ended. Zevroth stood in silence, watching the human fleet continue to pour through the transit gate. The count was approaching 100,000 now. 100,000 warships, force larger than anything the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. And it belonged to the species everyone had called primitive. Zevroth finally understood the truth. Humanity had not been primitive at all. They had simply been patient, waiting for the moment when their strength would be needed. That moment had come. Admiral Catherine Cole stood on the command deck of the Enduring Spirit and looked out at the stars. Her ship was the heart of the human fleet, a vessel so large that it had its own gravity and its own weather systems. 20,000 crew members lived and worked within its hull, and every single one of them knew that they were about to make history. The fleet had finished its transit 3 hours ago.
Ow!
247,000 ships now hung in the darkness of space, ranged in formations that had been practiced for generations. Every captain knew their role. Every crew member understood their purpose. This was the moment humanity had been preparing for since the day they first realized they were not alone in the universe. Captain Nathan Wright approached the Admiral with a tablet in his hands. He was a young man by military standards. Only 42 years old, but he had risen through the ranks faster than anyone in recent memory. Catherine trusted him completely. Admiral, all fleet groups report ready status. The Keth swarm has been located. They are currently consuming the remains of the Venery outer colonies. Catherine nodded slowly. How large is the swarm? Or estimates? Put it at approximately 30 billion individual organisms. They are spread across a volume of space roughly the size of the Sol system. 30 billion. The number was almost impossible to comprehend. Each of those organisms was a weapon, a drone controlled by the hive mind, capable of attaching itself. 2 ships and stations and eating through hull metal like acid. The Council races had never faced anything like it, because they had forgotten what it meant to face a true enemy. What about the hive mind? Catherine asked. We've identified several probable locations for the primary neural clusters. They appear to be distributed throughout the swarm, probably for redundancy. Smart, cut off one head and the others keep the body moving. Yes, Admiral. Our tactical teams recommend a multi-stage approach. First, we isolate the swarm segments. Then we eliminate the neural clusters one by one. Finally, we clean up the remaining drones. Catherine turned to look at the main tactical display. It showed the positions of every human ship, every council vessel, and the estimated location of the Keth swarm. The swarm appeared as a massive red cloud, constantly shifting and changing as the drones move through space. How long do our teams estimate this will take? Optimistically, 10 to 14 days. Pessimistically, a month. And casualties? Nathan hesitated. The models vary widely, Admiral. Best case, we lose a few hundred ships. Worst case. He did not finish the sentence. Catherine understood. This was war. Real war. The kind that the galaxy had not seen in millennia. People were going to die. Good people who had families and dreams and futures that would never happen. She had made peace with that reality long ago, but it never got easier. Lieutenant Maria Santos looked up from her communications station. She was one of the youngest officers on the command deck, but her skills had earned her a place among the best. Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They want to know why we have so many ships. They want to know why we never told them. Catherine had been expecting this question. She had thought about how to answer it for years, playing out different versions in her mind during long nights when sleep would not come. Open a channel to all council vessels, she ordered. Let them hear this. Channel open, Admiral. Catherine straightened her uniform and faced the camera that would broadcast her words across the galaxy. She thought about her grandfather, who had served in the first human fleet. She thought about her mother, who had commanded a carrier group during the Proxima incident. She thought about all the generations who had built and trained and waited for this moment. Representatives of the Galactic Council, she began, have asked why humanity maintains such vast military forces, why we spend our resources on weapons instead of art, why we train our children to fight instead of teaching them only peace. I will tell you. She paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment. Humanity learned long ago that the universe is not kind. We learned it when diseases swept across our planet and killed millions. We learned it when we turned weapons on each other that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. We learned it when we finally reached the stars and found them full of races who had forgotten the most important truth of existence. On the display, she could see the icons representing council vessels. Thousands of alien beings were listening to her words right now. That truth is simple. Peace is not the natural state of the universe. Peace is something that must be protected, something that must be defended, something that requires strength to maintain. She thought about the first human generation that had made contact with alien life, how excited they had been, how hopeful, and then how disappointed when they realized that the older races saw them as nothing more than violent children. You chose to believe that intelligence leads automatically to peace, that any species capable of building starships would naturally move beyond conflict. That was a beautiful dream. And we let you keep dreaming it because someone had to stay awake. Catherine looked directly at the camera, knowing that High Counselor Zevroth was watching somewhere. We smiled when you called us primitive. We nodded when you laughed at our military academies. We said nothing when you mocked our weapons and our soldiers and our paranoid preparations for threats that you believed would never come. We let you believe we were weak because the truth would have frightened you. She gestured at the tactical display showing the massive human fleet. This is the truth. For 200 years, humanity has been preparing for exactly this moment. Building ships in secret, training soldiers in hidden facilities, developing weapons that you cannot imagine. Not because we wanted war, but because we knew that someday something would come that your philosophy could not defeat. The swarm's icon pulsed red on the display. 30 billion reasons why Catherine was right. Deketh do not care about your art or your music or your ancient wisdom. They care only about consumption. They will not negotiate. They will not stop. They will keep coming until everything you have built is gone. Catherine's voice hardened, unless someone stops them, and that someone is us. Humanity. The species you dismissed. The species you mocked. The species that never forgot what you chose to forget. She took a breath. Pull your ships back. Protect your civilians. Focus on evacuation. The Keth swarm is now humanity's responsibility. We will handle this because handling this is what we were made for. The transmission ended. Catherine turned away from the camera and looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, the swarm was waiting. 30 billion monsters that had consumed 100 civilizations they had never lost. Neither had humanity. All ships, Catherine ordered. Begin approach to designated combat positions. We go in 12 hours. Round her, the command deck erupted into controlled activity. Officers relaying orders. Tactical teams making final adjustments. Engineers running last minute. Diagnostics. The largest military operation in galactic history was about to begin. The Keth swarm had no concept of beauty. It had no appreciation for the stars that surrounded it, or the planets it consumed. It existed for only one purpose, to feed and to grow. For 100,000 years, it had swept across the galaxy like a plague, leaving nothing but empty worlds and dead systems in its wake. It sensed the approaching ships. Millions of new signals appearing at the edge of its awareness. The hive mind processed this information with the cold efficiency of a machine and reached a simple conclusion. More food. The swarm began to move toward the human fleet. Billions of drones shifting their course like a living river, changing direction. Each drone was roughly the size of a small vehicle, covered in organic armor that could resist most energy weapons. Their bodies contained acid that could eat through ship hulls in minutes. Their only instinct was to attach, consume, and reproduce. They had destroyed countless fleets before. This would be no different. The first human weapons fired when the swarm was still 1,000 kilometers away. Plasma lances the size of buildings erupted from the dreadnoughts, carving tunnels through the approaching mass. Each shot vaporized millions of drones instantly. The swarm did not slow down. It had lost millions of drones before. It had trillions more. But the humans were not finished. The second wave of weapons activated. Nuclear missiles launched in coordinated salvos, their warheads designed specifically for swarm combat. They detonated in patterns calculated by computers that had been solving this exact problem for 200 years. Each explosion triggered a chain reaction. The The radiation and shock waves destroying drone after drone in an expanding sphere of death. Still the swarm came. The destroyers moved forward, their railguns firing rounds that traveled at a fraction of light speed. The projectiles were simple pieces of metal, but at those velocities, they hit with the force of atomic bombs. They punched through the swarm like bullets through water, leaving trails of destruction behind them. On the observation deck of the Volanthi flagship, High Counselor Zevroth watched in stunned silence. Around him, representatives from 12 different species stood equally speechless. They had been evacuated behind the human lines, protected by ships that they had once mocked as primitive. "How is this possible?" whispered the Thenari ambassador. Her name was Lasara, and her bioluminescent skin was flickering with colors that indicated extreme distress. "Our weapons barely scratched them. We lost entire fleets trying to damage them." Zevroth did not answer. He was watching the tactical display, watching the human ships move with a precision that should have been impossible. Thousands of vessels acting as one, each movement calculated to maximize destruction. "They are not just powerful," Lasara continued, her voice hollow. "Their weapons are designed for this. Specifically designed to fight swarms. To fight enemies that come in overwhelming numbers." Zevroth understood what she meant, and for the first time in his long life, he felt genuine shame. Humans had spent their entire history fighting wars against themselves. Wars where armies numbered in the millions. Wars where victory meant killing more of the enemy than they could kill of you. They had developed weapons to fight exactly this kind of threat. Because they had been this kind of threat, they had taken their capacity for violence and turned it into something useful. On the battlefield, a carrier group executed a maneuver that made Zevroth's scales go pale. 1,200 ships moved simultaneously, splitting around a section of the swarm and then closing in from all directions. The drones caught in the middle were annihilated in seconds, trapped between walls of fire with nowhere to escape. "They are not fighting the swarm," Lysara said slowly. "They are harvesting it." The battle continued for hours. The swarm kept coming, sending wave after wave of drones against the human lines, and the humans kept destroying them. Their formation never broke. Their fire never stopped. They fought with a relentless efficiency that was almost mechanical. But they were not machines. They were people, and some of them were dying. A destroyer group found itself surrounded when a tendril of the swarm managed to slip past the outer defenses. The drones attached to the ships and began eating through the hulls. Emergency beacons activated as crews fought desperately to survive. Admiral Catherine Cole watched from the command deck of the Enduring Spirit. She saw the icons on the tactical display begin to flicker and die. Each flickering icon was a ship. Each dying icon was hundreds of lives. "Carrier Group 7 moved to support the destroyer group," she ordered. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched tight at her sides. "Admiral, if we move the carrier group, it will create a gap in the Western formation." "I know. Fill it with elements from reserves."
"Admiral."
"The reserves are already committed to do it." Catherine's voice left no room for argument. "We do not leave our people behind. Not ever." The carrier group moved. The gap appeared. Reserve ships rushed to fill it. For a few terrible minutes, the formation wobbled. The swarm sensed weakness and pressed forward. Then the gap closed. The carriers reached the surrounded destroyers and began clearing the attached drones. With close-range weapons specifically designed for that purpose, 4 of the 12 destroyers were saved. 800 people who would have died were going home instead. The price was 1,200 other lives. 3 carriers that were overwhelmed when they stopped to help. Catherine felt each death like a knife in her heart, but she kept giving orders. Because that was her job. Because those deaths would mean nothing if she stopped fighting now. The battle entered its 6th day. The swarm had lost 10 billion drones. The humans had lost 4,000 ships. Both numbers seemed impossible, but both were real. On the 7th day, human scouts located the first primary neural cluster. It was hidden deep within the swarm, protected by the densest concentration of drones anywhere in the galaxy. "Target confirmed," Nathan reported. Tactical recommends a concentrated strike with all available dreadnought weapons. Do it, Catherine said. 200 dreadnoughts aligned their main guns, the most powerful weapons humanity had ever created, pointed at a single target. When they fired, the combined energy output was equivalent to a small star. The neural cluster disappeared, and something changed in the swarm. For the first time in 100,000 years, the Keth hesitated. A portion of its mind had simply stopped existing. The remaining neural cluster struggled to compensate, to redistribute control. To keep the billions of drones moving in coordinated patterns the humans did not give them. Time to recover? Strike teams that had been waiting for exactly this moment launched toward the remaining neural clusters. Smaller ships designed for speed and stealth, carrying weapons designed for precision rather than raw power. They darted through the confused swarm like sharks through a school of fish. One by one, the neural clusters fell, and with each one, more of the swarm went still. Drones that had been deadly weapons moments ago floated lifelessly in space. Their connection to the hive mind severed. On the observation deck of the Valenthi flagship, Zeverath watched the swarm begin to die. Not slowly, not gradually, but in great waves, as the humans systematically destroyed every piece of intelligence that had held it together. They knew, he whispered. They knew exactly how to kill it. They had a plan for this. Lysara nodded, her bioluminescent skin now glowing a steady blue of relief. They had a plan for everything. The battle lasted 17 days. When it ended, the Keth swarm had been reduced from a galaxy-spanning threat to scattered remnants that would take centuries to become dangerous again. Humanity had one. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest enclosed space ever built by intelligent beings. Its domed ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Its walls were covered with the symbols of 400 different species, each one representing a civilization that had joined the great community of stars. Today, the chamber was full. Every seat was occupied. Every species was represented. They had come to witness something that had never happened before in the history of the Council. They had come to thank humanity. Admiral Catherine. Cole walked down the central aisle with Ambassador Daniel Price at her side. She was wearing her dress uniform, the dark blue fabric covered with medals and ribbons that represented decades of service. Her silver hair was pulled back and her face showed nothing of the exhaustion she felt. The battle was over. The Keth swarm was destroyed, but the cost had been higher than anyone wanted to admit. 4,000 human ships had been lost. 19,000 human lives had ended in the darkness between stars. Sons and daughters who would never come home. Parents who would never see their children grow up. Friends who would never share another laugh. Catherine carried all of them with her as she walked. Their faces flickered through her memory. Their names were burned into her heart. She reached the central podium and turned to face the assembled representatives. 400 species. Trillions of beings. All of them looking at her with expressions that ranged from gratitude to fear to something that might have been respect. Hi. Counselor Zeverath rose from his seat. The ancient Valenthi moved slowly, his gray-green scales dull under the chamber lights. He looked older than Catherine remembered. The past few weeks had aged him in ways that time alone could not. Admiral Cole, he said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I wish to speak. The Council may speak. Zeverath took a breath that seemed to shake his entire body. For 12,000 years, my people have led this council. We have guided hundreds of species toward what we believed was enlightenment. We taught them that violence was primitive, that war was obsolete, that any species advanced enough to reach the stars would naturally evolve beyond such barbaric concepts. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was heavy with something Catherine had never heard from a Valenthi before. Humility. We were wrong. The chamber erupted in whispers. A Valenthi admitting error was almost unheard of. Zeverath waited for the noise to die down before continuing. We looked at humanity and saw a young species obsessed with weapons and conflict. We mocked your military academies. We criticized your spending on defense. We called you primitive and violent, and incapable of understanding true civilization. Catherine said nothing. She simply watched and listened. And while we were mocking you, you were protecting us, building ships in secret, training soldiers we never knew existed, preparing for a threat that we refused to believe was real. Zevrov's voice cracked slightly. You knew we would need saving someday, and you saved us anyway. Stepped out from behind his podium and walked toward Catherine. His movement was slow and deliberate, and every being in the chamber watched in stunned silence. When he reached her, he did something that no Volanthi had done to any other species in recorded history. He bowed. Admiral Catherine Cole, on behalf of the Volanthi people and the entire Galactic Council, I offer you our deepest gratitude and our most sincere apology. We were wrong about humanity. Catherine felt something tighten in her chest. She thought about all the years of mockery and dismissal, all the times humans had been relegated to the back rows of this very chamber, all the speeches about how they needed to learn from the older, wiser races. Hi, Counselor, she said, her voice steady, despite the emotion building inside her. We never wanted to be right about this. We never wanted the galaxy to need what we could provide. We hoped that your philosophy was correct. We hoped that intelligence really did lead naturally to peace. She looked around the chamber at all the alien faces watching her. But we could not take that chance, because the universe does not care about hope. The universe does not care about philosophy or art or beautiful dreams. The universe is vast and old and full of things that want to consume everything we have built. Catherine thought about her grandfather, who had served in the first human fleet. He had told her stories when she was young, stories about why humanity built weapons, stories about what they were protecting. Someone has to stand between the darkness and the light, she continued. Someone has to carry the burden so that others can afford their beautiful dreams. We chose to be that someone, not because we love war, but because we love peace, real peace, the kind that can only exist when good people have the strength to protect it. She looked directly at Zevrov. We do not want your apology, High Counselor. We do not need your gratitude. What we want is for you to remember. Remember that peace is not free. Remember that safety requires sacrifice. Remember that the universe will test you again someday, and you must be ready. Zevrov nodded slowly. We will remember. I swear it on behalf of my people and this council. Catherine allowed herself a small smile. Then something good has come from all of this. The lives we lost were not spent in vain. Daniel stepped forward. If the council permits, humanity has a proposal. Zevrath gestured for him to continue. We propose the creation of a new joint defense initiative. Human military expertise combined with council resources. Training programs for any species that wishes to participate. Early warning systems throughout the galaxy. Not because we expect another Keth swarm, but because we must always expect the unexpected. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, representatives began to signal their agreement. First, the Venari, then the Corvani, then dozens more. Within minutes, the vote was unanimous, for the first time in galactic history. The council had agreed to prepare for war. Catherine watched as the representatives began discussing details and logistics. She felt a hand on her arm and turned to find Daniel looking at her with concern. You look exhausted, he said quietly. We all are. Then rest. You have earned it. Catherine shook her head. Not yet. There is still work to do. There is always work to do. She looked up at the domed ceiling of the great chamber, at the symbols of 400 species that humanity had just saved. They were not perfect allies. They had mocked and dismissed humans for decades. They might do so again when the memory of the Keth faded. But that did not matter, because humanity had not saved them for gratitude or respect. They had saved them because it was the right thing to do, because that was what humans did. They protected. They fought. They sacrificed. And when the darkness came, they stood in its path and said, not today. The great chamber slowly emptied as representatives. returned to their ships and their worlds and their lives. Catherine stayed until the end, watching the last stragglers leave. Then she turned and walked back down the central aisle, toward the ship that would take her home. Behind her, the symbols of 400 species glittered in the light. Humanity had taken its place among the stars, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as guardians. The eternal watchers in the dark, and the galaxy would never forget what they had done.